Right, step 2, read the scenario. So we've seen the questions. Let's scroll back up to the top of the scenario. If you haven't read the instructions at this stage, it might be well worth just reading through the instructions just to make sure that nothing has changed in relation to things like, is there an absolute word count limit, or is it still flexible here? That's still flexible. So just check nothing has majorly changed in there. And then we're going to read the scenario. Now, key thing about the scenario is that everything in the scenario is there for a reason. Like NEBOSH, they're not devious. They're not trying to trap you or catch you out. But they've written this very carefully, and it's been reviewed multiple times by a committee of people. And they have inserted things into the scenario deliberately to help you answer questions. And if something's in there which isn't useful, then they've taken that out. So in one way, this is an interesting game I like to play, is answer an exam paper and use every single piece of information in the scenario and then just delete it as I go along to say I've used it. And I try and end the exam paper with nothing left in the scenario. Everything's been used somewhere in one of my answers. That's a cool game to play if you're a nerd. Now, if you're watching this on YouTube, then you do not have access to the full Compassa course. So you don't have access to all of the past exam papers which we're allowed to share with people. But if you are a Compassa student, then in our exam technique section, we've got a folder full of exam papers which NEBOSH have allowed us to share with students. We don't have hundreds, but we've got 10 or 12 or so. You'll see that some of those scenarios are very, very negative scenarios where things are badly managed. There's a bad manager, bad culture, things going wrong, there's an incident. And you might find that sometimes the scenario is very positive. It's a good culture, very committed managers, things are going well, there's no accidents. Or sometimes it's somewhere in between. Do not expect a bad scenario, because then you may feel surprised, you may feel shocked, scared even, by the positive scenario. And the reason why people don't like positive scenarios is because it's so much easier to point out things that are wrong. But when you get a positive scenario where everything's perfect, that actually makes it a lot harder to point out things that are wrong. And it also makes it harder to point out improvements. You're like, everything's great. How can we improve anything in this place? So just expect that things might be negative or positive. Read through the scenario carefully, probably a couple of times. And what I would like you to do is copy the scenario into another document. And I'll tell you why in a moment. But what we want to do is we want to be able to highlight things in the scenario. So all we do, and this is a computer skill, I can't teach you computer skills, but take this scenario and then go to a Word document and dump it in there. That's page 1. Make sure you get page 2. It's a little bit of a faff, this. Once upon a time, the NEBOSH documents were locked. You weren't able to do this, and so you had to print them. But nowadays, recently, we've noticed they've all been unlocked, which is wonderful news. And so you can copy and paste from them very easily. So once you've done that, now why do I want you to copy it into a document? It's because what I want you to do is this. Later, in one of the steps, I want you to highlight things that are relevant to the question you are being asked. So you'll be highlighting chunks of the text, which you might think is relevant to the question you are answering. And obviously, once you've finished answering that question, you can then remove all of the highlights off of there and start again. So make sure you read the scenario word for word a couple of times, and just remember, everything in this scenario is relevant to one of the questions you are about to answer.